Hey everyone, it's Tyler. Welcome back to the Libertas International podcast. I'm so excited to be with you again. I'm so excited to welcome our guest today. He's a good friend of mine. His name is JC Holt. JC has a long career working in law enforcement with different nonprofits, and he's a pioneer in this space. He's seen a lot of changes over the last 20 years. He's been with the police force. He's supported survivors. He's investigated sex crimes. And I'm really grateful for this conversation on a couple different levels. For one, it helped me to understand what it looks like to do an investigation here in the States when someone reports a sex crime, and the toll it takes on our officers working these type of cases. We, the topic of police, the police brutality, how to reform the police, different funding from police is a discussion that's ongoing. I think those conversations are helpful. I think it's always good to improve in the way that we go about enforcing the law in the justice system. And a lot of the times the people that I think are left out of those conversations are police officers. And so JC, he gets very insightful on some of the criticisms of law enforcement, some that are deserved, some that are not deserved. And I'm just really grateful for his vulnerability in here on what the toll of the job has taken on him personally as well. I've known him for 3 years now, 3 or 4 years. He's someone I admire. He's someone I look up to. He's someone that I see looking to make an impact. That's always putting survivors first. And I'm grateful that he would come on this podcast. And you may hear some background noise in the podcast. We sat next to an open window, and it was peak hour traffic, so you may hear some cars going in and out, but it's not too bad on the audio. But I'm grateful he's here. I'm grateful you guys are here once again. Please visit libertasfreedom.org. Check us out. Make a donation. Keep supporting us. There's so many good things happening across the world, across Latin America with the work that we're involved in. Survivors being supported, bad guys being arrested, and Americans being held accountable for their crimes. And so we get into that discussion as well. And so without further ado, welcome to the show. JC Holt, a 20-year law enforcement professional in Salt Lake City, Utah. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Libertas International podcast. I'm really excited for our guest today. It's my great honor to welcome JC Holt to the Libertas International podcast. I've known JC for probably 3 years now.
Probably, yeah.
Very impressed with his heart, with his spirit, all that he's accomplished in his career, all he continues to accomplish in life. He's someone that I consider a good friend, and I'm happy that he would join on the podcast today to talk about what he's done, what he's doing, and what changes he hopes to see in the world today. And so, JC, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, what makes you you, and tell us a little about JC Holt.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate you having me on here, Tyler. I appreciate what your organization does, and near and dear to my heart. So I think that you're doing great work. So as Tyler said, my background, he and I worked together in shared space and serving really victims and working on cases that involve sexual exploitation and abuse. I'm a retired law enforcement officer, so I'm from the state of Utah, and I worked for a pretty large jurisdiction here for Utah size and spent 20 years in the profession. I retired back in 2021, right at my 20 years. In Utah, you have to do, the program I was under is you would do 20 years and then you're eligible for retirement. So I retired, but besides the work accolades and things that I did there, I'm a dad, I'm a husband. You know, I've got 4 kids, 3 daughters that are luckily look like their mother, and they're in teenage years now, and one's out of teenage years. So, yeah, and then a son. So I just I'm a guy who likes to serve other people. Spent my whole professional career basically doing that until very recently, and I've just had this life of public service that seemed to find me, and it's served me well, and learned a lot along the way, and come out of it with a few bumps and bruises and scars as well. So, but I'm grateful to be here today to talk with you. So,
well, talking about public service, tell us about how you first got into that. Like, when did JC Holt as a little boy decide I want to be a police officer?
Yeah, JC Holt as a little boy did not decide at all. It It was a decision, to be honest with you. A little bit unconventional of most stories that you hear of police officers, cops. I didn't really grow up wanting to do that at all. I actually thought when I was younger that I was going to play in the NBA, and that didn't work out. That just didn't work out. Every day I was out practicing, and, I didn't become an NBA player. So I got to the age of 21 and really just kind of felt like I was floundering a bit. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Only had about a year of college under my belt that was mostly just screwing around, to be honest with you. And I just, my father, my dad, he worked down at the state prison. He has a background in construction, maintenance and stuff, and he was an employee of the prison, but he was not like a prison guard. But he was a state employee, and he encouraged me to get a good job that had good benefits that could take care of a family, and they were hiring for correctional officers. And so that was my entry into it. And I started out as a correctional officer. I worked for the probation and parole department, not at the prison. And I spent a few years there and just learned more about the profession and got all my certifications and eventually became a full-fledged officer. And I served a number of years as a probation and parole officer. I supervised sex offenders out in the field, guys that were on parole and probation. I got tired of babysitting people, so I joined the municipality side of things where I became a police officer at a local jurisdiction and just did a bunch of things in there. But I spent a lot of my career, 20 plus years, 10 plus years of my career were spent in investigative type work, and a big portion of those years were geared towards sex offenses and sex crimes. So I just didn't grow up wanting to do it, and to be honest with you, when I first got in, I had what I deemed was a 5-year plan. I thought, well, I'm going to do this for 5 years because I think it will be fun, and I think I will learn. And then I'll probably get out, and I'll do something else. And I never got out. 5 years turned into 20 years, and here I am now, So I got in early at age 21, got out pretty early, So I would like to think that I have quite a bit of life ahead of me working, doing something else. But there is kind of a gravitational pull always when you have this in your background. It just seems to, it seems to resonate for a long time in your life. At least that's been my experience now, almost 3 years post retirement. So
what is the I wish you mentioned a lot of it. I wanted to be an NBA player too, so it didn't work out. I remember I tried out at Dixie State when I was coming out of high school, and it just didn't go super great for me.
No,
and that's when you're just like, I'm not as tall as the other kids. I don't shoot as well. I'm not as fast. I'm not as good as dribbler, and just you get humbled pretty quick. But in high school, those dreams.
Oh yeah,
it's sad. But you bring up an interesting point. I know we have some young kids that listen to this too, and there's a lot of opportunities in government at the state level, at the federal level, and as a kid, if I could do my life over, I probably would have went that route. I just didn't know how to go about that, as a young kid. So I think it's good that you had that advice, because I think I would have done the same if I would have gotten the same advice.
Yeah.
But you mentioned being a 20-year police officer. What is the hardest part about being a cop?
Oh, boy, it's a hard question, because I think it's a difficult job. I think there's many different levels, but for me, the answer's easy for me. The hardest part was the impact that it had, and even continues to have on my family, on my immediate family. It's I think when you're in the middle of the profession, you would like to think that, oh, this is good, this is impacting me, but I'm okay. The things you see, the things you do, the edginess that comes, I think, with the territory at times. Really, what I would deem is what I've learned now. It's just trauma. It's the traumatic experience, exposure over and over again, where most of the folks that you're working with every day, they're not bad people. I think that's a misconception in law enforcement. Oh, if you get in law enforcement, you have to work with dirtbags all day. That's not true. Most of the folks that you work with in law enforcement, to be completely candid, they are normal, everyday people who just happen to be having the worst day of their lives. I always viewed it that way. But that impact that has on you all the time of bad news, bad things, seeing bad things, helping put things back together, it has a profound impact upon you personally. And I think it's impossible to not bring it home. So it starts to bleed over to relationships impacted, such as with your spouse, with your kids. And that's why so many people don't make it through the profession without picking up either one, bad habits, or two, additional family members, meaning that they get divorced and they move on, and it's tough. So for me, the hardest part was the impact on my family. And to be honest with you, I still feel like today that we are still picking up those pieces years later. And I'm married to the same woman that I started this career with. But it would be foolish to not admit that my career has not impacted relationships with kids, with everything else. In some cases, it's for the better, to be honest, but in some cases, it's for the worse. It's not as good. So, for me, that was pretty hard. That was a hard part of the job.
It comes out in weird ways too, like the edginess it takes on a person. Like I first realized it. My mom called me out on it because my humor got significantly darker.
Yes.
And for me, I thought I was being hilarious, for one. Like, I thought the jokes I was making were funnier, the things I was saying. And it's a significantly darker humor than what my mom was used to. And for me, it was just me trying to make sense of the world that I was living in.
Yeah.
But, like, it had an effect on someone that I cared about. And she was like, hey, if you don't mind, Tyler, please don't share those kind of jokes when you're around me because I find them offensive. I don't find them funny. And I have to make a conscious effort, like when I go home, like we're coming back around the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, of not engaging in dark humor around my mom, just because it has an effect on that. And for me, like, it was the first time that I had seen how hearing bad news all the time, like the trauma that you're taking day in and day out, is affecting you without maybe you even knowing it, and someone that you care about helping recognize like those changes.
Yeah, I think I was looking back on it now, and I mean the benefit of 2020 hindsight is pretty awesome in this case, but it's almost like a wedge, and the wedge gets driven in further all the time, creating the distance and the disconnect between. And the dark humor and the things like that, I mean, it always kind of comes down to, are you going to laugh about it or are you going to cry about it? And I'm not a good crier. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a good person at showcasing emotion, and it's tough for me. So I tend to deflect that and will go the other way. Which the fortunate thing for me is my spouse, my wife, my partner. She's a nurse. She's a 20-year registered nurse, and so she's faced similar things in her career with rough things, bad news, people getting hurt. And so for us, we have a unique relationship where it's somewhat relatable, and we were always very open with each other and honest and tried to stay very connected. But it's tough. I now found myself with my older girls in particular, I've had to work hard to establish good, healthy connections with them now that they're older, because there was a disconnect when we were younger. And in some ways, my kids, they don't know me. They don't know who I am. Because one of the things that I do think I did pretty well at when I came home is I didn't talk about work. I didn't obsess over it. I didn't sit and talk. So they didn't really know what I had done at work, which means that whole side of my life to them is somewhat mysterious. Now they're at an age where they want to talk about it. They want to know more. And I'm having a hard time talking about it, to the point that I see a therapist right now to help me with that. Hey, your kids want to hear this. They want to hear that. Because for me, if people ask me, hey, what was your crowning achievement in law enforcement? Or tell me a good arrest story. Like, I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't know. I think my brain compartmentalizes that part of my life to try to move on, because I recognize that, and it's not all bad. I'm making it sound just absolutely horrible. It was a great career. It was a great profession. I was able to help people, but it takes its toll. And when you're done paying that price of that toll in order to move on, I think you have to take certain steps. and I've worked pretty hard to take those steps the last couple of years. But it comes at a cost for sure.
So, you mentioned your investigative work with sex crimes in Salt Lake City. I guess the questions I have on those, just on your career on that, is what does that look like? Like, what does the life of a sex crimes investigator in Salt Lake City look like? When did you start doing it? And how, as a police officer, how do you do it? Like, how do you build rapport with the victim? How do you keep them regularly updated? Like, tell me how you do it.
First and foremost, I'd address the first part of the question. If you're assigned to sex crimes in the Salt Lake City metro area, and I think that this is anywhere, USA, you're going to be busy. The prolific amount of cases, it's mind-boggling, to be honest with you. And I don't think you're really exposed to that until you get a caseload. And it can be really tough, because if we look at sex crimes as a whole, I don't personally believe that there is a more vulnerable crime to be committed against a person and have them come out of it and survive than a sex crime. I mean, it's just something that is so personal. When an offender takes that from a victim, it's like a piece of them that they never get back. And so you're dealing with very fragile circumstances that are really tough. And that being said, the mechanisms and how you build those cases are very specific in what the information that you need. So the rapport building piece is huge on being able to just relate with that person and be professional and personal. I mean, I think about most of us have a hard enough having a normal conversation about sexual things. That's a private matter for most people. So just imagine a stranger coming up to you and asking you very personal questions about sexual things in a case where you've been offended against. So it was an uphill battle, to be honest with you. And I think you get really good at communicating with folks if you're to be successful. You're professional. You try to be emotionless if you can, which seems a little bit cold, but that's calculated because it helps you to remain objective in the case. And let's face it, that can be used as a defense later on, that you influenced a person to say something or this or that. So the crimes, the other thing that could be really challenging too that I found is especially working with women that had been offended against. And perhaps I'm not the guy, but I might fit the profile of the person that offended against them. I mean, I'm a guy first and foremost, and it can be uncomfortable for that. So I would say there were times I was really good at it and other times where I had a hard time getting through to people. So, I mean, it's a hard question to answer, but very unique job assignment. Not one that's really... I don't think most police officers in the profession look at sex crimes and be like, oh, I want to go there. I want to go do that. In fact, most people will try to avoid it. And I was no different. I of course wanted to be an investigator. I wanted to investigate the robberies and the homicides or the assaults. I wanted to do all that, right? That's the stuff we watch on TV. It's really cool. I want to go solve these cases. I didn't think about the sex offenses. And then when I started, getting into those, it's almost like you either have a personality and a knack for it to be able to connect with people, or you don't. And I would say that I even believe at some places you can't even train that with people. They either have it or they don't have it. I think I was moderately successful at it, to be honest with you. When it comes to little kids that have been offended against, I mean, that's a whole other... You could spend a whole podcast talking about that, about the complexities of child interviews, forensic child interviews, what they look like, the difficulty of them. It's heartbreaking, to be honest with you. It really is. It's heartbreaking to listen to these stories of these victims telling what happened. And I think the most heartbreaking thing isn't hearing it, it's feeling it. It's being in the same room with them and looking at their body language and feeling that energy of like, holy cow, this person is broken. This has happened to them. And it's just overwhelming, to be honest with you. I think you get to the point where you get used to it. You put an exterior shell on and you work through it. But I got to tell you, some of my personal struggles that haunt me from the career stem from investigating these types of cases. Not that it happened to me, but I just think the continual exposure of trying to help people that have been impacted by it, it does something to the people that try to help them. And it certainly has affected me.
So, I mean, if you can, like, when, so let's say you get a report of a 14-year-old girl in Salt Lake who's reports being assaulted.
Yeah.
What is the first steps? What steps you have to take to where, like, I guess walk us through an investigation of what it would look like before the guy gets arrested.
Oftentimes, the referral will come in through a variety of means. It might not be a self-report. So hypothetically, let's just say, I'll use your example, the 14-year-old girl. It's not always the 14-year-old girl who's making the report. It might be parents. It might be a school counselor or whatnot, which often, and the reason I bring that up is because that can create difficulty right from the get. Because sometimes victims they're not ready. They're not ready to talk about it, and they don't want to. And so it's difficult. But we'd get a complaint from somebody. The first thing we would do is try to solidify the complaint, meet with the complainant, whoever it is, if it's the school counselor, if it's the parent, have a good discussion with them. How did you come about this information? And then the next step would be to meet with the teenager, and there was a very specific prescribed method in how you would interview persons under the age of 18 to get that information. And essentially it really revolved around a methodology where it was not leading in any way whatsoever. It was open-ended questions. It was rapport building based to try to figure out if they were willing to disclose themselves that abuse that had happened. And in an ideal situation, we would get a disclosure from the victim, meaning the information that we needed, outlining the offense against the offender. And then, of course, we would get to the suspect interview after that point, where we would try to meet with the alleged perpetrator and see what they had to say about it. And then it was a matter of drafting up all that information that you have with the case and meeting. I was very fortunate to work with multidisciplinary teams. So individuals from the State Division Child and Family Services offices, individuals from the district attorney's offices, other entities that had professional experience in this area too, and we would staff the cases, and then ultimately, if we had probable cause, the prosecutor would file charges against the suspect. That's a lot how it went. If we had more emergency type situations where it would just happen, of course, then we would go out and make arrests and kind of work it from the backward angle coming forward. But generally on these sex offenses, I'm not an expert on this, but I do know this. For the most part, I think a large percentage of those that are offended against sexually, it's by somebody that they know, or somebody that knows them, that has groomed them, that has worked through the rapport building process with them. It's not a stranger. And so these reports are coming in delayed. Sometimes the abuse is sustained and ongoing. It's been happening for years. So, but it was rewarding. It was rewarding to make that arrest always when we would get the search warrant at the house. And then, of course, when we make an arrest, oftentimes we'd get a search warrant for the house. We'd be looking for evidence to corroborate the crime. And, that's just it's a long process. I think a lot of people, it's so much more than just like, getting a report and running out and arresting a guy. And a lot of it hinged on the disclosure from the victim themselves. What did they give us a good disclosure, or did they not? And if they didn't, oftentimes at age 14, I got to be honest with you, it was hard. It was hard to get a filing from the DA's office. And it's not the DA's office's fault. It's not. I mean, they need to have the appropriate amount of evidence against the perpetrator to establish probable cause to go and make that arrest. That's what our legal system was founded upon. So, I won't sit here and say that I think the whole thing's broken. I just think it's complex. And people oftentimes don't understand the intricacies involved.
So, thank you for that. That even helps me understand a little bit better of what that process looks like. Because you wonder, I've helped, survivors here in Salt Lake make reports before, and nothing ever happens. But the part of the in between, that's something that I didn't understand before, and so I feel like I understand more that you explained that. So no, thank you for explaining it. You told me a story once. You told us a story. It was a group of people you told this story to about you interviewing a little girl.
Sure.
And I'll let you tell a story because I won't share it because I will butcher it. But I remember just being so... Well, I'll tell you what I thought after. You tell a story and I'll tell you what I thought.
Well, I think the story you referenced is when we would do these interviews that I just spoke of, it was obviously in a controlled environment. Here in the state of Utah, we had very specific protocol on the manner in which the interview was conducted, and we typically did them at children's justice centers, which were not police stations. The last thing we want to do is bring a little kid into a police station, and it can be intimidating. So these centers were set up to make these children feel more comfortable, maybe more of like what I would deem as a therapist's office setting, or at very worst a doctor's office setting, something that was somewhat benign. It's probably a bad example because my kids hate going to the doctor. They associate that with when they were little, especially, I got to get a shot. But anyway, so it was a comfortable environment. It also was wired with audio and video, so that in the event that this case went to court, we had some pretty good evidence where we could avoid putting little kids on the stand. So we would do these interviews here, so I would set the stage there so you understand the environment. And when we did the interviews, it was always the same. We would work in tandem, in pairs, with another fellow investigator. One person would be in doing the interview with the child, and one would be in the back room monitoring the interview live through the audio and video that we had capacity. So in this case, we were interviewing a little girl. I cannot remember her exact age, but she was around 6 or 7 years old. And it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was a family member who was perpetrating the abuse. I cannot remember how the allegation came about or any of that. It doesn't matter. What matters, the reason that I told this story is on this particular case, we were in meeting with this little girl, and I talked about the feeling that I felt. This little girl, I believe, had been subjected to sustained abuse from the perpetrator, meaning that it did not just happen one time. It was ongoing. It had been happening for a long period of time. And she did not disclose. She wouldn't disclose what had happened. We used the methodology that had been prescribed to try to get her to disclose. And remember, this is not an interrogation. This is an interview of a kid. We're not going to interrogate a victim. And when we asked her the questions, and I say we because both of us tried, because sometimes when you would interview, you just didn't build the rapport with the victim, and sometimes your partner could get a disclosure. So we would try both ways. And I went first, and I could not. She didn't disclose, and I knew the reason that it was so hard for me is because I knew she was truly a victim. And when I sat and talked with her, this little girl, she just cried, just tears running down her face, and she didn't disclose. And I was just so frustrated because I wanted to get the information so badly that we needed to hold the person who had done this responsible. And I knew that her disclosing that was a hinge point that we needed to reach in order for that other thing to happen. And it just didn't work. And I came out, and my partner went in there, and he tried, and it was the same thing. She just sat and cried, and she didn't give the information. And we walked away from that interview not successful in that area. And the bottom line is, if we want to speak about this from a scientific point of view and maybe more of your background, but I don't have background in this, for whatever reason, she wasn't ready to disclose, or she didn't trust us, or something was off, but we didn't get the information we needed. And some may say, well, just go back and try tomorrow. But that was not the way that it was designed. You don't do that. And it just kept me up nights, man. I mean, I just had a really hard time with it. And I don't think it helped at all at the time that I had a little girl that was the same age at home. And as she sat there and cried, I just envisioned my child doing that. And how is that not personal? But it just really impacted me for a long time. And I'd love to tell you that that the case ended up okay and everything afterwards. Dude, I don't even remember. I don't remember what happened with that case. But I'll never forget the look on her face. I'll never forget her crying. I'll never forget the feelings that I have of inadequacy or whatever. I'm not getting the information, not being able to perform the job that I had to get the disclosure. When in theory now, it doesn't have everything to do with me or my partner. It's just the dynamics of the situation, And I would tell you from a profound level, you just don't recover from something like that overnight. I still think of that. I think the only reason I'm able to talk about it right now is because I have sat in therapy and talked about this. I mean, I can talk about it now without showing emotion. I couldn't before, which means I never told the story because I'm just that way. I tend to not tell a story that's going to make me emotional. I just know I won't do it. I'm not good at being vulnerable, I guess. But that was really hard for me. And that wasn't the only time that happened, but that one really stood out to me. And I don't know. I don't know where that little girl is now, man. That was years ago. I hope she's okay. But, these kids, the stuff that happens to them when they're 6, 7, 8 years old, and if it has that kind of effect on me, that's just sitting there that just wants to do good, what kind of impact does that have on them as adults? It's this kind of stuff changes lives forever. And the perpetrators that take it away from them, I mean, there's no love lost for me on them at all. They got nothing coming for them that's good. If it's just such a horrible thing to take that virtue away from somebody in that manner. I just cannot think of a crime for me that I abhor more than that. But it was a driving force, boy. I'll tell you, it made me hungry to work on the justice side of things, to find the perpetrators and do everything within my power, within my job scope, to make sure they were held accountable so that they ain't hurt other people. So
I think there's a couple of different ways I want to go with that. First thing is that you guys probably could have got a little more something if you were to treat that little girl with a little less respect and less care. Like, I'm sure, as police officers who were trained in this, you probably could have been a little meaner to her.
Yeah.
And maybe got a little more information, but you guys didn't.
Yeah.
And I feel like that says, I mean, I guess I also ask you, why didn't you?
Well, for starters, it was completely against the protocol that we've been trained. And my understanding of it is to what end is that going to help her, to be mean? If it almost throws you into the same space as somebody that has offended against her because you're being mean. I think that little girl is more likely to view you as a threat than somebody that's going to help. And my hope is that if she is out there, if anybody out there that has listened, that has had that treatment before, that the officers were kind and weren't mean, didn't interrogate, that maybe later on down the road that person does trust a police officer to help them, a well-intended police officer, because it's not just about getting the information, right? It's about helping the person who's been offended against, and the manner in which we want to help all the time might not be the best way for them. So I just really appreciated, the standards that we held up in Utah with this. It was frustrating. It was a frustrating process to not get that, but I had the utmost respect for the process, the research behind it, the methodology. It's sound, and I knew that. I believed that, and so we just we were very strict. We didn't violate that at our agency, and we were known. Our group was known as a group that was that way, that treated that with respect and honor. So
No, I think it's good too, because I've worked in other agencies where they would push harder, where they might threaten jail time for this little girl. Well, if she's an immigrant, they might threaten deportation.
That's terrible.
And I think it comes from a method that's not trauma informed. I think it comes from a method or a point of view of ego, of once again having a male make a decision for a little girl. And I can't imagine how hard it was to be in that.
It places value. I think a lot of it is it just places value on the information that you need rather than the individual. And that's the key right there. And in some ways, you have to be really careful, because that's exactly what has happened with a person who's been offended against, is they've been objectified. They've been treated as an object to satisfy a means to an end for somebody else. If you turn that information on a victim interview like that, and you're just treating them like an object to get a piece of information, to get ends to the means, even if it's a good end, the end is their offender being held accountable. Why would you not do that? Well, yeah, but look at the cost to get to where you're at. So, and here lies the issue of the complexity of investigating sex crimes. It is so difficult to, and oftentimes everybody's like, why doesn't it work? Why isn't it successful? Well, it's because these dynamics exist within those cases. And it's just so hard. It's a very unique crime to investigate versus other crimes. A lot of individual characteristics that are not consistent in other crimes. So,
no, I like the way you worded that too, because that's something that we emphasize in our agency, of verbalizing it in a couple of different times so that the survivors know that it's true. Is we want you to get justice. We'll help you feel comfortable. We'll help you make a report. We want to see that happen because we've seen healing happen in justice. But once you get justice and the guy's in cuffs, the police are going to stop talking to you. But we're not. We want to see you continue to grow. We want to hear about your kids. We want to see you. We want to be at your graduation. We want to be at your baby showers. We want to be, yada, 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 all these different things. And it helps them, so when that moment arrives where the police are asking for specific information, that they know that whether they give a great interview or whether they give one that's not so great, that we are still sticking with them because it's the person that matters, not just the information that they have.
Yeah, and that's great. I think that's important. And we have a long ways to go in the profession to, I say we, I'm not in the profession anymore, but there's a long ways to go in the profession to get that kind of understanding out there. And, the complexity of the career just in and of itself and what it does to you also does not create or foster the best environment for you to function in that role. I mean, let's be honest. Like, it's tough. The whole thing's tough. It really is. It's very difficult. TV makes it look different than what it really is.
Makes it look fast.
Yeah, it makes it look fast, and it also, it's just, I don't know, until you live through it, until you see it, until you experience it, you just don't. It's just overwhelming. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it than that. It's just super overwhelming.
So, I mean, you've touched on a lot of different things on this podcast so far, and just how, what this career, what seeing this, what people involved in this fight, like with the personal toll that it takes. And so, two questions with this question. When did you first notice it was taking a toll on you? And what have you done? Because ever since I've met you, you've been such an advocate for therapy, mental health, self-care. How did you get that way, and what have you done to take care of yourself?
For sure. That's a great question. One that I still feel uncomfortable answering at times, but I think it's important. I think I started to really notice things. Well, I'll tell you a story. I was what I felt like at the heat of my career. I think I was about 8 years in, and I remember this story vividly. I was on a fugitive task force at the time, and I was just doing some really what I thought were fun things. We were chasing bad guys. We were kicking doors. I was on a tactical team. We were chasing the worst of the worst, and I was just having a great time. I mean, I was in my late 20s, just kind of the prime time, and I spent a lot of time at work. And I had little kids at home, 2 little girls, and I'll never forget, I come home one night from work, it was late, and I remember it was wintertime, and I was freezing cold when I got home, and I just thought, well, the only way I'm going to warm up is if I get, in the shower or, sit in the tub or something. So my wife was talking to me, and I'm warming up. I remember what I was doing. I was sitting in the tub. TMI, maybe, but this is not sexual story, I promise. And I was just talking to my wife, and she just stopped me mid-sentence, and she's like, "This isn't working." And I says, what do you mean this isn't working? And then we had about a 30-minute discussion about how home wasn't working. Our relationship wasn't working. And a lot of it was I wasn't working towards it. I was so focused on the career and other things that I was neglecting or forgetting things that were there. That was the first time that I really noticed it. And that was the level that it had to get to for me to notice, because I was just entrenched in doing my job. And I was a good cop. I know I was. So I kind of started to pay attention there. That was the first time. And then I really started to notice the personal effects to me. That was when I first noticed the effects on my family. I didn't notice the personal effects on me until probably about 5 years after that. And it started manifesting itself. I realized that I was angry a lot. I struggled with edginess and being angry over little things that were stupid. I would get pissed off. That's easy to notice with your family, because they start reminding you how big of an asshole you're being when you're being that way. And you don't think it, but then you realize, well, yeah, I am, because of this, because of that. And I still kind of just ignored it for a few more years. And then late in my career, I'll tell you what pushed me over the edge. Amongst all the sex crimes and everything else I did, and domestic violence cases and all the people getting hurt, I investigated dozens and dozens of death investigation related cases. Some of them were homicides, overdoses, suicides, natural causes at time. I mean, I just spent a lot of time around dead bodies and death, and delivering death notifications to people that their loved ones had taken their own lives. And I mean, because that was the same unit. We all covered the same things. And I started having terrible dreams. In the middle of the night, waking up, vivid dreams that were screwed up. For example, I had a dream that reoccurred to me a couple times. My third girl at the time, she was about 9 or 10 years old when this came about. This was just not that many years ago, but I had a vivid dream where I watched her take her own life. She shot herself in the head with a gun in my dream, and I watched the whole thing unfold. Well, the irony was when I went to bed that night, everything was fine. There was no thinking about I'd been on plenty of cases where a person has taken their own life where they've shot themselves with a weapon in the head and had to see the mess of what that looks like, and it's awful. But I'd compartmentalized it, and I'd been on suicides where little kids had done that. I'd been to autopsies where I'd seen little kids that were victims of crimes or deaths had been, what happens on an autopsy, where they were broken down to figure out what happened. And I just woke up, and then I just started not sleeping well at all because I was having these dreams. And I just remember finally I went into a therapist, and I'm like, what in the hell is the matter with me? I don't understand why I'm having these dreams. My home life is good. I have good relationships with my family. My kid that I watch do this in the dream, she's fine. She's fine. She's going to school. She's a normal, healthy little girl. She's not struggling with any emotional issues that I'm aware of. Everything's normal. But I'm watching this in the dream. And then I just started realizing I had some major problems. And so, long story short, I went through some pretty extensive EMDR therapy, and I just found out that I had a lot of crap buried that just had been compartmentalized, and the way it was manifesting itself to me was through these dreams and through just negative thoughts and not being able to sleep. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but if you can't sleep, man, it just messes you up. It screws everything up. And I'm not going to say things didn't get really bad for me before they got better. And so I'm an advocate for officers now to be proactive about this and to nip this in the bud. I literally waited way too long to go talk to somebody, and I'm lucky, to be honest, to be here. I had friends in the profession. I had a dear friend that killed himself, that I knew very well, that I worked with. That was a wake-up call for me, but still not enough for me to go get help. I thought, he just let it get to him. He just didn't deal with it. And the way of dealing with it in my generation was you just bury it. Freaking bury it and don't bring it back out. So the EMDR was very helpful for me. And since then, I've been a lot more open about willing to talk about stuff like this. But for me, it's what my therapist told me. It was more compartmentalized trauma. I didn't necessarily have single events that were really, really bad. I had a handful of them that were, but I think it was just the plethora of crap over years, all the cases. And ironically, the story that I just told you about the little girl, I didn't realize that one was buried so deep and having such a profound impact on me, but I processed that one through EMDR. And boy, that one was hard. I remember the day that I went through that, doing the EMDR therapy with the therapist when I dealt with that particular one, and that one was heavy, super heavy, more heavy than most of the other ones. Whereas I thought maybe the ones that would be more traumatic were the ones that I saw, body parts strewn about and everything else. For me, it didn't impact me as much. And the other thing that I really struggled with is, the whole just dealing with the death of loved ones. I always say the weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth that you might read about in Scripture. It's a real thing. I've witnessed it in real life with people that have been through traumatic experiences, losing loved ones, and that has a profound effect upon me. I just think I'm naturally empathic towards other people, and I feel bad when they feel bad, and so it's been a journey. It still continues to be a journey. I still actively and regularly see a therapist right now. It's not every week or anything like that, but man, if I start feeling things, I go in. I talk to them, because to me it's important that I process these things, because I've lived through a lot of experiences. I hope to live a lot longer. I hope to be healthy mentally, physically. So to me, it's a priority, and it's become a priority since I retired even more. And I'm one of these guys that's gotten out, and I've kind of stayed out for 3 years, and now I work in a completely different field. I mean, I wasn't up until a few months ago. I was working in a complementary field where I still was serving somewhat in this area, working with law enforcement very regularly. I don't at all anymore, and I feel a little bit lost. But to me, it's all part of a necessary healing journey, and it's tough. It's really tough.
I resonate so much with what you've just mentioned, like the symptoms of like PTS and how you think you're going crazy. Yeah. I remember when the nightmares first started for me, I was like, what is the deal? Like, why am I having these nightmares? And
just out of the blue.
And like you get pissed off over like the dumbest stuff, and you just. I flew off the handle once at a colleague of ours, Jessica, for nothing. I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I acting this way? But like what did it for me, what finally pushed me into therapy, because I was super resistant for a long time. And what did it for me was we lost a survivor that I was close with. She took her own life. And just like that was like, I've had grandparents die. I've had people like that die. But just something out of the blue, someone that I cared about so deeply. And it was a pain that was just like, if I'm going to deal with this 100 more times in my lifetime, where you love somebody, you try to help them, and then they're just not there, I don't want to be here.
Yeah. The thing that was a big one for me that I think that was a perfect manifestation, looking at it now, 2020 hindsight, again, when you work in an environment that I've described with my professional past, you're working largely with uncontrollables. You don't know what's going to happen. day in and day out, and you really don't get to control what happens, even as much as you want to. So what I found myself doing that strained family relationships was I became very controlling of certain environments for me that were triggered with anger. So I would be like, okay, and I know this is going to sound really stupid, but like if the house was a mess, that was a controllable that I could function with. And I've learned about this now since in therapy, and it makes total sense. If you have a cleaned up house, which to some doesn't mean anything, but to somebody that works in an uncontrollable environment, a clean, well put together home signifies order and control. So that would be a trigger for me. So I would come home and I would just clean the house. And I wouldn't necessarily get mad at my wife for not having the house clean. That wasn't a fight at our house. It certainly was with the kids. It continues to be, right? You're always telling your kids, pick up after yourself. But I think that's just normal. But for me, it was a priority. And it was a priority that I would put too much emphasis on at times, for sure. But I now know why. I think it was just an environment that it was something I could control, that I was trying to, that really wasn't a big deal. And I didn't even realize I was doing it. And it was in other areas too. I mean, I remember it's probably not normal. And you look at a guy like me and you would never know it now. But I was a guy, or have been a guy, that has spent a huge amount of time at the gym. And I never have the diet to complement all my hours at the gym. I'm a living testament of that. And I don't do this anymore, but I used to. I remember going to the gym and blasting music just as loud as I could get it in my ear.
Oh, yeah.
Usually heavy music, man.
That's good stuff.
I'm listening to heavier stuff, not mellow. And lifting weights until I couldn't move my arms. And just making it was, for me, it was a release of all that negative energy. So, and I was grateful to have it, to be honest with you. I think that's a healthier way to manifest it rather than drinking or getting into other things that were bad. I mean, and I think that's why people do that they're trying to find outlets. So, but I would, and that was a priority too. If I didn't get to go do that, man, that was controllable for me, where I'm like, I got to go work out. And I struggle with balance today. Like, I'm still not a guy. I'm either going to do something all the way or I'm not going to do it at all. So like if I'll go to the gym today, even if I haven't been there in a month and I'm going to go lift weights, I'm going to go in with the same intensity that I had before, which is really, that's bad. Now I'm just going to injure myself. So this kind of stuff affects your balance in life in all areas. And it really is difficult. And this is just for people that serve in this space. I mean, it feels selfish to even talk about this, because what about the victims? I mean, we're not even victims of this. Like, I've never been a victim of this. And if it impacts me this way to help people that have been victims and see this, what kind of impact does it have on victims? You know, so there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, that's something that we invest in pretty well. Is if a survivor wants to work on their physical fitness, that's something that we help invest in. We help cover protein. We help cover gym memberships, just because we see a lot of healing with it. We have this amazing now 20-year-old who, her gym journey's been awesome. And she said some pretty profound things to us, where she says, when she's working out, a lot of the stuff that she's gone through goes into her heart, stays in her heart, but stays out of her head. Yeah. And it creates a balance with her to where, especially when she's feeling sad, that her body feels just as sad, sore, whatever you want to call it, as her body. And it creates some kind of weird equilibrium with her, where she feels better overall now that her body is just as affected as her spirit was. And so the whole thing, I'm so glad that you mentioned, because one of my questions was just advice for people that may have gone through it or going through it. And I feel like you've given some good concrete steps with fitness, with mental health.
And I mean, and it doesn't work for everybody, right? I think the biggest key there is finding something that you enjoy. Trying to find joy in life is a big deal. And your attitude, honestly. Attitude is, I still very much believe that statement that, the vast majority of what happens to us can be overcome by our attitude and the way that we approach it. There's so many external factors and everything in life that, we get to choose. We get to choose how things impact us to some level. And so just staying positive. And I've really, it sounds like such a bum career. I feel bad that I've portrayed it this way in some ways, but to me, it's a reality. And anybody that comes to me that is looking to get into this, I'll have this candid conversation with them. I'll say, look, it's a great job. It's a great profession. It's a great career. And we need people to do it. We need good people to do it. But you need to be aware of what you're getting into. You need to, and be invested in it. Be invested in knowing how to take care of yourself and other people in doing it, because it has a profound impact on the way that the job is administered as well. And I personally think that, it's been very difficult for me the last several years to watch the criticism into the police world, because it's just not simple. It's not a cut and dried process, and I'm not excusing some of the poor behavior that we've seen. But to me, I think maybe in my heart of hearts, I offer a little more grace than some people would in this scenario, because I can see how you can get off the charted path in this profession if you're not careful. And I watched people do it. I had people do it. I can't say in certain periods of my career that I might not have been at vulnerable stages where I could have done it. And so it manifests itself in a bunch of different ways, but we truly don't have a society that understands the complexity of, one, dealing with victims of crime, and two, understanding the impact and complexity of police officers out there administering the job. We lack an understanding of it. I mean, case in point, my wife, as personal as a relationship can be with the wife, we've been married for 20 years. She did one police ride along with me when I was about 10 years in, and she said the same thing that everybody says that sits in that car when they were there. I had no idea. And then she said, I just don't even know how you do this. You're a different person at work than you are at home. And I'm like, you have to be. It's a different job. I mean, so it's tough. My hat is off to those that are out working the street still, and it always will be. Always. I just think I offer a little bit more grace in that area. It doesn't mean I excuse the bad behavior that we see sometimes that manifests itself. It's not good. But the impact that it has on it as a whole is, to me, has taken some unfortunate turns in the last few years that are not good for society.
Yeah, as we're winding down, this is actually my last question, and it stems from a conversation I had with a law enforcement officer today, where I got really short with him, and it's not his fault. He's just working in the system that he's been given. But we have this case in Colombia with an American guy. Typical cases that we have of an American guy who's abused a 16-year-old girl, and as her advocate, I'm asking, when's this guy getting arrested? When are we gonna bust his ass? And the response I got was just very, it was very unsatisfying to me. He's like, well, we need another victim. And I was like, well, you have one. And he was like, well, we need another one. And I was like, so is the first one free? Like, why do you need a second one? I don't understand.
Yeah.
With the first one should be enough. And we had this conversation where he was walking me through, and I still think, I want this on the record on my podcast, that one victim should be enough. I want to stick with that. But he walked me through the system that he's been given, that he's working in, and how he's trying to improve that system from within. And I love this guy a lot. And if he spoke English, you would know that I'm talking about him. But you brought this up, and I think it's such a good point, to where, especially in the last couple of years since the pandemic, there's been a lot of focus on law enforcement, on things like police brutality, things like victim-centered training, things like the use of resources, the use of deadly force, all these different things. And so from someone who is on the inside for 20 years, are any of those criticisms valid? I think is what because a lot of them are just unvalid. The defund the police, I think, is incredibly stupid. Trying to judge a police officer for them making a life or death decision in a matter of 1 second or less, I think that's lost on a lot of people. But as someone who is inside the system, are any of those criticisms that have come up valid? And the ones that are valid, what do you think the solution is to help better that situation?
I definitely think some of them are valid. I think it would be ignorant to say otherwise. I mean, any profession, no matter what it is, that's not open to criticism, that has community investment, and you're not listening to the stakeholders that are inside that are affected by it, of course the criticism is valid. It's always valid. Misunderstood, probably a better way to put it. I think that it's valid. I think some of you mentioned a few different areas there. That question has a lot of different layers. The justice system for which the officers may function in, depending on where they're at. And you spoke of a police officer in another country, so we don't even know their protocol. And I agree with you, one victim should be enough. That seems like a ass-backwards policy to me. Yeah. That's not something we have here in the United States that I'm aware of. But we oftentimes might criticize the police officer versus the justice system. And the police officer and the justice system are not the same thing. They're components that work within the same mechanism together, and they're interconnected, but they operate separately at times. And so an officer may have done their job, and perhaps a prosecutor didn't do their job. Maybe a prosecutor did their job, and an officer didn't do their job. I mean, here's the deal. We're dealing with human beings. Human beings are not perfect. They make mistakes. And so you're always going to have the human element involved. And it's interesting to me how we've just moved away from that principle, and people just expect a machine to work through. And I mean, hopefully in listening to this today with me, it's been somewhat relatable. Like if you're listening to this and you're that person, you're that officer, you're that prosecutor, you're that judge, what are you doing? How are you making the decision? If you really are the person that's empowered to do it, that's a big task. And not all of them are made with great insight at the time, and then it's easy to armchair quarterback it afterwards. I think perhaps the best way to address that is through training, is through debriefing situations and saying what went good, what went wrong, and then using it moving forward, always trying to get better. So the whole thought process behind training and trauma-informed, it's needed, and really that's what it's about, right? We're talking about, hey, what's worked in the past and what hasn't worked in the past. Let's move it forward. I used to always say, and I still tell my kids this all the time, there's a lot of different ways to accomplish something. If you just go about the same methodology all the time and it doesn't work, it's not effective. So there's right, there's wrong, and there's effective. Sometimes the rights and wrongs don't matter that much. Sometimes what matters is what works, what's effective. And of course it needs to be legal and morally acceptable and okay, but it's tough. I do think there is some undue criticism when it comes to certain aspects of use of force. And this is a slippery slope. I used to get asked this question all the time. JC, do you think, and this is a question I've been asked in recent years, do you think that it's getting worse out there in society? Is it getting more violent? Objectively speaking, and purely my opinion, no. I don't think it's getting worse. I think it's always been this way. I think it's always been violent. I think human beings have always been rotten to each other. We've got history books that are full of it, that document it. I think the difference nowadays, everybody can see it. It's all on YouTube. It's all on social media channels. And violence is ugly. It's always ugly. It's unnatural for human beings. It should be. But I do believe that the only way to overcome violence, when you're presented violence, like a violent situation that's hurting somebody. Let's take a violent person that's a school shooter, that's in shooting up a school. The only way to deal with that is through additional violence. Offering that offender violence in a controlled aspect and stopping them from hurting other people. That's going to look really ugly going in. And you can break that down on many levels of violence. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to this, right? Like we look at cases like the Floyd case where it's just unacceptable. that crosses that threshold. But one of the things I'll share this insight with you. When I left the profession 3 years ago, I was a supervisor, and I left from a patrol aspect. I was out patrolling, and I had a young crew of patrol officers. I think the average age was probably 25 years old. Here I am. I'm 41. I'm like an old guy in the career, like the profession. And it was interesting working with these younger guys, First of all, it made me wish I was younger. I'm like, well, geez, I wish I was 25 again, I can't stay awake nearly like I used to. But I noticed that they were afraid at times to use any type of force. And when I talk about use of force, I'm talking about anything. I'm talking about putting your hands on somebody as use of force. I'm not talking about shooting people or hitting people. And we would deal with violent perpetrators, and I noticed they were often resistant to want to use the force necessary to effect the arrest, which is legal, by the way, to do. It's perfectly legal. And not only that, it's effective. And I watched situations come up where they didn't use the force when needed to effect the arrest, and the situation would get worse. And then we'd have to use more force to deal with the situation. And I believe that's a negative repercussion of all this criticism that has been out there in society. I never, when I was a young police officer on the streets, I never worried about somebody filming me because we didn't have cell phones that filmed people. Now the fact that our officers are thinking about that before they do their job, it's ignorant to not think that that's not affecting the way they do their job. And everything will be broken down and analyzed from the armchair quarterback view. It's impacting the way policing is administered across America. And I'm not an advocate for going out and dragging knuckles and knocking heads. It's not what I'm saying here. But I'm saying it's ugly work. It's ugly business. It always has been. It always will be. It can be violent at times. And it's violent on both ends. It's violent having to deal with a violent offender and using the force necessary. I've been on the scenes of officer-involved shootings. I've been part of that. Nobody wants to do that, but at times it's where the job leads you, and it's an unfortunate set of circumstances that can happen. So I think the criticism sometimes could be offered with a little bit more grace, just more humanely. And obviously we've had some really bad experiences that were not handled well by police officers that look really, really bad, and these are not the cases I think that need to be excused or offered grace. But rather, I think what it's done is it's made everybody just lump everything into one category. And that's just not fair, So some of it's undue, some of it's due, but it's a learning environment. We're adapting, we're changing, we're overcoming. But I do know this. We have a lot of officers that get hurt every year. It's a dangerous job. And I don't see a lot of people stepping up that want to do that job either. So those that are brave enough to do that, let's make sure they have the equipment, the resources, the training, and the support they need to do a good job, and to make sure that they also don't violate people's rights and take that too far, because we know that happens too, and that is completely inexcusable. I don't support it at all.
You brought up a lot of good things there. There's a really good book called the Locust Effect, where it talks about people's poverty index depends on their accessibility to good law enforcement, to where law enforcement and their ability to even the scales is what for a lot of times can keep people out of poverty. And we've seen that like in some of the work that we've done, where we give a small business to somebody and they get extorted. So now they're even poorer than they were before because they're in debt to the people extorting them. They are working twice as hard to pay off this extortion, and they need access to the law to help even those scales there. To where there's a direct correlation between people that are in poverty and their access to good law enforcement. So, and it's okay, I think, to say that most cops are good people and the bad ones should be punished in the same sentence, and for that to be okay.
100%.
And it's just such an interesting, just a tendency of human beings to just want to put everybody under the same banner. Like I'm seeing it now, like with the online communication with this Hamas-Israel war, to where they want to paint all the Jews as a specific type of person. They want to paint all Muslims as a specific type of person. And I saw it in 2020 with the police officers as well, to where it's just easier to label somebody.
And I think being a cop for a long time teaches you a few things. I would say this. I have been involved in investigating criminal cases against offenders that were from all walks of life, all gender, all ethnicity, all socioeconomic background. I've investigated crimes where other cops have been perpetrators and been largely responsible for bringing a case forward where they're held responsible. I've investigated other cops. I've investigated attorneys. I've investigated doctors. I've investigated clergymen from different faiths. I'm just here to tell you, I really, what it does is it makes you realize that everybody's human. Everybody. It doesn't matter who they are. Titles mean nothing to me anymore. I don't look up to a person because of their title. It just really breaks down that human element to you, and I think us as a society, that's an okay way to be. But I do think it's really bad to lump people into groups. I see the same thing in the healthcare community, right? Sometimes doctors get a bad rap. Something bad happens. Oh, I hate doctors. They're the worst. They're this way. They're that way. Well, that's not fair. Maybe the person you dealt with was that way. Maybe they were being a bad human that day. And it sucks that they had that authority banner, because the next doctor you see, they're going to have to overcome that. And that's what sucks about this whole thing. And that's where I think we can get better as society. And I'm going to sound cheesy, but it's about offering love and grace to human beings. And just realizing, I dealt with a cop that was a freaking jerk. But maybe that cop just came from a really bad scene, I dealt with a doctor who treated me like absolute garbage. Maybe the doctor just told somebody some terrible news. I mean, can you imagine having a job where you're walking in the room and telling patients, hey, you got cancer. You're going to die in 3 months. And you do that for a lot of time. This stuff that I've talked about today, in my opinion, it's not unique to policing. It's just life. People that deal with other people in life who help people that struggle, they gain greater respect for this, and they start to realize, and I think we as society, I think we need to be better. I think we need to treat people better than what we are because of titles and religion and jobs and everything else. It's just, life is messy, Everybody has their struggle. And I'm certainly grateful for my professional career to teach me that, because I don't think I would have learned it if I hadn't been in a life of service and helping people that are in bad situations, It just gives you so much more empathy and understanding. But we can all be that way. It's a choice, It's unfortunate to me, the degenerative nature of how we treat each other. We get people that are fighting now about how they vote, or hey, I can't talk to you because you're this or you're that. It's just silly, So I've just gotten a lot more forgiving. It's just, to me, it's just really important. It's important that you treat other people with respect and dignity, no matter what, no matter who they are. Minus these people who hurt little kids, Yeah,
let's put the caveat in there.
I think they're, long sustained abuse, and predators are just that. They're predators, and you have to treat them accordingly so that they can't be a predator against somebody else. But it's interesting too. We end on this way because I don't think this podcast will release until February of 2024. And so next week, I can say this without any kind of restrictions because it's not going to go online. But, next week, we're traveling up to New York because there's a SWAT officer who traveled down to Colombia. His name's B. Harry, and he abused a 19-month-old baby. And I told my buddies, in law enforcement about this, and I've never seen them so pissed. Not just because of the age of the girl, but because of the badge that guy's carrying. Exactly. It gives everybody a bad name. But, again, it's a classic example of a human being. It's just, again, it doesn't mean anything to... just because you have a badge doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. It should. It should mean something, and that's why you get pissed off about it. But it happens. It happens. And it's just terrible. It's terrible what some human beings will do to other human beings. It's awful. And I admire anybody like your group that's out trying to make a difference and help people with that. And, I don't know. My time in this space might not be done. It might be done. I have, like I said, I have a completely different job now. I'm not working in this field whatsoever. I kind of was forced into that. I feel like in a lot of ways, like God just plucked me from where I was and he forced me into a different path. And it's been a journey, I have everybody ask me now, well, how are you doing? People that I know that are close, how are you doing now that you're out of this? And I'm like, guys, I'm kind of bored.
Yeah.
Like, I'm kind of bored. A normal job, if you want to call it that, is abnormal for me. I'm just not used to the feeling. So I'm trying to embrace it, trying to just be really appreciative and present where I'm at, and recognize that, maybe my season in this space is not there for a little while, and you need a break. And I will say there's some refreshing parts of it, of just stress, burden, it's been relieved. The burden's been relieved. And so, but yeah, that really sucks. So, but I admire the work that you and your organization do. I think it's great. I think it's very noble work. It's hard. It's you do a lot of things people never see. They never know. They'll never experience. And I definitely have profound appreciation for that. And I admire your strength. But I would tell you, take care of yourself and make sure those that work with you take care of yourselves, because it's hard. It's very impactful. And all that good that you do, to help other people, if you totally lose yourself in it and all your connection in life too, that's a toll that hopefully you don't have to put on yourself, so. And I know you already know this. You and I have known each other the whole time we've known each other. We've been very open about our
struggles,
wellness plans, if you will, struggles. Yeah. Like I know the things that you like to do and to get away from this, and I see you doing them regularly, and that's good. That's healthy. And you're way ahead of the curve in doing that compared to when I was, because I was just like, my solution was just jump in deeper, just work harder,
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the love, JC. I appreciate you coming on. I know your wife said she wanted you to be out of here by 6:15. So do you have any last thoughts, any last suggestions? And the mic is yours for 2 minutes.
Oh, I don't know. I think I've said everything there is to say. This is really hard space to talk about. It's uncomfortable, but I honestly think the only way that we can truly impact the space for good is by talking about it. It is verbalizing some of these feelings, these emotions, and I just think that you take people that have been offended against sexually, and they can't be advocates for themselves most of the time because of the complexity of emotions that are involved. So it's important to have good professional space where you can come in and be advocates for them in their most vulnerable time. And this is something that's not going away, unfortunately. It's very prolific in our society, and so again, it's just so hard. It's very complex, but I'm certainly grateful for the chance I've had to serve other people and the way that it's impacted me. I don't have any regrets. I really don't. I definitely have regrets regarding the way I dealt with things, but that's part of life. So it's just learning. And I would say that anybody that's thinking about getting into it, do it for the right reasons. Just get in and do it for the right reasons. And I'm a person that I believe that there is a God, and I believe that God uses us to help other people, and you never know when that you're going to get called on to do that, and it is very rewarding. I think that's what motivates you to do it. It's super rewarding. It just brings on this aspect. That's why I say right now I might be a little bit bored, because I'm not doing the same level of work, but it's this is a hard subject, but I'm just grateful to come on and talk about it. I think it's healthy. It's vulnerable. It's not necessarily fun, but it was funny. Before I came here today, I was like trying to avoid this discussion, which is usually because I knew what you would ask me. I mean,
how do I cancel?
We're friends, and I'm like, it's not something that I don't want to do this. To be honest with you, it just doesn't come natural because I knew what you would ask me. But I knew at the end it's good. It's good information. If what I have through experience can be used to help somebody else that they're going through something, why would you not talk about it? So I would just end on that note and just tell everybody, hey, treat people nice. Treat people like human beings in this crazy day and age where we're identifying everything so divisive in our society. It just does nothing for any of us. Like I really believe that to my core, and especially in helping these victims, we've now categorized certain things in that space too, and it sucks. It's just awful. So